My mom kicked me out to make room for her boyfriend and his kids. My mom had always been the closest person in my life. We'd been through so much together that I could never imagine she would one day be the one to kick me out of my own home. I grew up in an ordinary family. My dad was a quiet, kind man who worked in construction and spent all his free time with us. When I was 14, he got sick. At first, we thought it was just fatigue. He would come home from work and fall asleep on the couch, still in his clothes. Then came the hospitals, tests, surgeries. The doctors kept stalling, but deep down we all knew how it would end. That year was the scariest of my life. I went to school during the day and spent my evenings sitting by my dad's hospital bed, holding his hand. My mom tried to be strong. She always showed up with a smile, though I knew she cried quietly in the bathroom so I wouldn't see it. When he passed away, we stood side by side at the cemetery, holding each other's hands so tightly our knuckles turned white. We promised we would always stick together, no matter what life threw at us. After the funeral, things were hard. We saved on everything. Mom took extra shifts, and I scrubbed staircases in apartment buildings for a little cash to help. We'd spend our evenings at the kitchen table with a cup of cheap tea, talking about what we'd do next. Sometimes we'd fall into silence, but even in that silence, I felt it. We were one. I finished high school, enrolled in a local college, and kept living at home. Not because I couldn't afford to move out, but because I didn't want to. That house was our little world. I helped with chores. We cooked together. We watched old movies. Mom used to say, "We're lucky, sweetheart. We have each other." And I believed it would always be that way. Everything changed the day one man walked into our lives. It all changed in early spring. One evening, Mom came home from work looking unusually cheerful. She set her bag down on the floor, sat at the kitchen table, and for a moment just stared out the window. After work, my co-workers and I stopped by a coffee shop, she finally said. I ran into an old friend there. His name is John. We used to work together. A week later, John came to our house for the first time, tall, wearing jeans and a simple gray shirt, with an easy but confident smile. He carried a paper bag from the bakery down the street. Inside were fresh croissants, the kind Mom loved. They sat down at the table and started talking, laughing about things from the past. I sat nearby but felt like an outsider. Their laughter, the way they looked at each other, how Mom lightly touched his arm when she spoke. It all made me feel like a guest in my own home. After that night, he started coming around more often. At first, just on weekends, then on weekdays too. Sometimes they drink wine in the backyard, sometimes watch old movies together in the living room. Mom seemed to bloom when he was around. She'd fix her hair before he arrived, put on a dress instead of her usual sweater. I kept telling myself this was a good thing, that she deserved to be happy. But deep down, I already knew. With his arrival, our little world would never be the same. At first, it all seemed harmless. John would stay over for the night if he and Mom had been talking late or sharing a bottle of wine. He'd sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room and leave early in the morning before I was even up. But week by week, his overnights became more frequent. One day, I noticed his razor in our bathroom, then his jacket hanging on the hook by the front door. A couple of days later, there were groceries in the fridge that Mom had never bought before. Hot sauce, energy drinks, and an expensive steak sealed in vacuum packaging. Mom brushed it off. What's the big deal? If he's here most of the time, why not keep a few things here? Soon, I stopped seeing Mom alone altogether. Whenever I came home from classes or my part-time job, he was already there. Sitting in the armchair with his phone, watching TV, pouring himself coffee in the kitchen. Sometimes he'd even open the door for me, as if this was his home. I tried to stay polite, but I could feel our me and Mom slowly dissolving. Now there was always a third person in the house, and I couldn't even remember the last time we had dinner together, just the two of us. I kept hoping it was just a long, drawn-out romance, that one day things would go back to the way they were. But one night at dinner, Mom said the words that changed everything for good. John and I have decided he's going to move in, and his kids will be coming too. I remember sitting at the table, my fork frozen in my hand, as a ringing filled my ears. It's temporary. They're going through a lot right now. They're good kids. Her explanations blurred together into meaningless noise. A week later, our quiet suburban home was no longer quiet. Two kids moved in, Lucas, 12, and Emily, 9. School backpacks by the door, a basketball rolling across the floor, boxes of toys stacked in the hallway, sneakers scattered everywhere, loud laughter in the mornings. All of it filled the space that had once been ours. My bedroom was untouched, but every shared space, the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, no longer felt like mine, even for a second. Lucas blasted the TV at full volume. Emily took my things without asking, and John gave out instructions like he was in charge. Don't leave your laptop on the couch. We need more space in the fridge. Try to be quieter when you come home late. And Mom just smiled and said, they're just kids. Give them time to adjust. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be them adjusting. It would be me. And it was going to be much harder than she thought. Life in the house had completely changed. In the mornings, 3 people crowded the kitchen, arguing over who would use the toaster first. The bathroom always had a 20-minute wait while someone finished their shower. And in the evenings, the living room TV was tuned to whatever show John had picked. And even a quiet request to turn it down was met with eye rolls. I started spending more time in my room. But one night, as I stepped into the kitchen to make some tea, I overheard John speaking to Mom in a low voice. You know, she's old enough to live on her own. I froze in the doorway. Mom was silent for a moment before replying, I know, but I don't want to push her. My heart sank. Those words felt like a crack forming in a wall, and I knew it was only going to get bigger. A couple of days later, Mom brought it up herself. You're an adult now. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in your own place. I can help you look, and we could even help with the first month's rent. It's just, well, it's a little crowded here now. I wanted to ask, crowded for who? Me or them? But instead, I just nodded. In that moment, I knew my time here was coming to an end. I packed my things in one evening. Most of the time, I just sat on the floor of my room, holding an old photo album. Pictures of me and Mom, at the beach in the park, at the kitchen table with mugs of hot cocoa. All those moments felt so far away now, like they'd happened in another life. John was home that day. He walked past my room a few times, glanced in once or twice, but said nothing. Only once did he speak. Need any help with the boxes? I shook my head. Mom came in later that evening. She sat on the edge of my bed and gently touched my shoulder. You know, this isn't because I don't love you. It's just, right now this will be better for everyone. I nodded, but inside everything tightened. Better for everyone meant better for them, not for us. When everything was ready, I carried the boxes down to my car. Mom helped load them into the trunk, hugged me, but her hands were cold. I started the engine, and as I backed out of the driveway, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing next to John, who already had his arm around her shoulders. I wasn't just leaving a house. It felt like I was being torn out of my own life. Update, 6 months later. It's been 6 months since I left the house I grew up in. I'm renting a small 1-bedroom apartment near my college. There's barely any furniture, just a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. But it's quiet here. Sometimes the silence feels heavy, but most of the time it feels like freedom. Mom and I hardly talk, just a couple of messages each month, usually about the weather or the bill for my old phone plan, and that's still in her name. We haven't seen each other once. A few weeks ago, I ran into our old neighbor at the grocery store. She said she often hears arguments coming from Mom's house. Apparently, John has been getting irritable, and his kids fight with each other all the time. I don't know if it's true, but hearing that left me with a strange feeling in my chest. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just sadness. Sometimes I think about texting Mom, inviting her out for coffee. But then I remember how she stood next to him that day I left, and my hands just dropped to my sides. 1 year later. It's been almost a year since I closed the door to my childhood home for the last time. I've gotten used to my life now. Morning coffee in silence, walks through the park down the street, evening calls with friends. I no longer woke up to the sound of someone else's footsteps in the hallway or waited in line for the shower. And then, A message from Mom. Hi, are you home? Can we talk? We hadn't seen each other in nearly 12 months. I knew things between her and John weren't good, but I didn't expect it to end this quickly. He had left, taking his kids and most of his things with him. Neighbors said their fights had gotten so bad in the last few months that people could hear them from the street. Mom came over that same evening. She looked tired, older, her eyes red. I messed everything up, she said quietly, sitting at my table. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I realize I've lost you. I listened, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to hug her and forget everything. The other part remembered just how easily she had chosen them over me. Maybe you could come by sometime, Mom continued. Even just for dinner. The house feels empty without you. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to decide if I was ready to let her back into my life. I didn't go back to that house until a couple of weeks later. Standing on the front porch, I noticed the fence was leaning, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, as if, over the past year, it had shrunk along with the memories I'd left inside it. Mom met me at the door and hugged me tightly, just like she used to. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. In the living room, our old couch was still there, and I remembered how we used to sit together in the evenings, watching old movies and drinking tea with cookies. We had dinner. The conversation was careful, as if we were both afraid of touching anything that might hurt. She didn't ask me to move back in, and I was grateful for that. I realized I could be part of her life again. But not like before. Not living here. Not sharing this space. Our us was in the past, and I had to accept that. As I was leaving, I turned back and said, I'll come by. Just don't expect things to be the way they were. She nodded, and in her eyes, I saw the same pain I felt in mine. Lesson. Sometimes the people we love make mistakes that can't be undone. We can forgive them, but we don't have to sacrifice ourselves just to make them feel better. From the author. This story is a reminder. Sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us more than strangers ever could. We can forgive them, but we are not obligated to return to the things that once broke us. Protect your inner peace, and remember, your life belongs to you. What about you? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories ahead that will stay with you long after you've heard them.